It was the kind of place where people still left their front doors unlocked. Willow Creek, Oregon, a small lakeside town of just under 4,000 people. The kind of town where you knew your barista's dog's name and where bad news usually meant a pothole or a stolen bike. But on one crisp autumn morning, something happened that would shake that sense of safety to its core. Emily Harper was 28 years old. She worked at the town library, a warm, quiet building filled with sunlight, the smell of old books, and the gentle hum of the coffee machine she kept on the front desk. Emily wasn't loud or flashy. She wasn't the type to dominate a room. But people noticed her for her kindness, her patience, and her love for art and literature. She was close to her parents, saw her younger sister at least twice a week, and had a small but tight-knit circle of friends who gathered every Friday night to play music in a neighbor's garage. To most people in Willow Creek, Emily was safe, predictable, a person whose life ran on quiet routines, which is why no one could have imagined that routine would be broken, violently, in a single night. Saturday, October 14th, 2003. Emily's shift at the library ended at 8 p.m. As usual, she lingered a little, making sure the returns were shelved and the reading room lamps were switched off. At 8:15, she stepped into the cool night air, waved to a passing neighbor, and walked toward her car. She was never seen alive again. It was supposed to be an ordinary Thursday night in Willow Creek. The sun had set hours ago, and the small lakeside town was settling into its usual quiet. Streetlights glowed dimly under the misty rain, and the sound of water dripping from rooftops blended with the distant hum of passing cars. Emily Harper, 28, had just finished her shift at the public library. She was well liked there, polite, dependable, always ready to recommend the perfect book. That night, she stayed a few extra minutes to help a teenager find a research guide for school. At 8:15 p.m., she locked the front door, slipped her bag over her shoulder, and stepped into the cool, damp air. Several people saw her leave. One coworker waved from across the street. A retired couple walking their dog noticed her get into her car, a small, silver sedan, and drive off toward home. Nothing seemed unusual. In a town like Willow Creek, this was routine. But somewhere between the library and her house, something went terribly wrong. At 8:37 p.m., a local farmer driving home spotted a silver sedan pulled to the side of County Road 6, just 2 kilometers from Emily's street. At first, he assumed the driver had stopped to make a quick phone call, but when he passed again 15 minutes later, the car was still there. The headlights were on, the engine was running. He slowed down, looking inside. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger door was closed, but the driver's door was slightly ajar, letting rainwater drip onto the seat. On the front passenger seat sat a phone, screen cracked but still glowing with unread messages. Emily's purse was on the floor. Her shoes, a pair of brown leather flats she'd worn that day, were still on her feet when she left the library, but here they were missing. Something was wrong. The farmer drove straight to the Willow Creek Police Department. The desk officer logged the report at 9:05 p.m., noting that Emily Harper had already been mentioned in a separate call minutes earlier. Her roommate, Jenna Morris, had phoned in to say Emily was overdue and not answering texts. Within 20 minutes, 2 patrol cars and a search and rescue volunteer team were dispatched. The rain had intensified, soaking the road and obscuring footprints. Officers combed the area with flashlights, scanning ditches, tree lines, and the shoreline. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass. The car itself looked untouched, except for the open door. The keys were still in the ignition. Jenna arrived at the scene shortly after, clutching her jacket against the cold wind. She was pale and shaking, telling officers that Emily wasn't the type to just disappear. She explained that Emily had been quieter lately, spending more time at home or with a small circle of friends. She mentioned the recent breakup with Derek Miles, a subject that instantly caught the lead investigator's attention. Still, the officers didn't want to jump to conclusions. In missing persons cases, the first 24 hours are crucial, but they can also be clouded by false leads. They set up a perimeter search, Will calling Emily's name through the darkness. The rain turned to a steady downpour, forcing some volunteers to pull back. Just before midnight, a jogger reported seeing a dark green pickup truck idling near the same stretch of road earlier that evening. The description was vague, older model, possibly dented on one side, but it was enough to make the officers take note. The trouble was, in Willow Creek, half the town drove pickups. Without a license plate or clearer details, it was a thread that might never lead anywhere. For those searching that night, the image of Emily's car stayed with them. The quiet hum of the engine, the rain pooling on the driver's seat, the glow of her phone in the dark. Officers said it felt like walking into a room where someone had just been, but you were a minute too late. At 2 a.m., with no new leads and the weather worsening, the official search was suspended until daylight. The community Facebook page lit up with posts, urging anyone who had seen Emily or her car earlier in the night to call police immediately. Somewhere out there, in the quiet countryside outside Willow Creek, Emily Harper was missing, and every passing hour made it less likely she would be found safe. By morning, what began as a search would turn into something far more urgent, because the first clues were about to point towards someone Emily once knew well. The rain hadn't let up all night. By the time the first police units reached Emily Harper's abandoned sedan on County Road 6, the shoulders of the road were already soft with mud. Water ran in thin streams across the pavement, trickling into the open driver's door. The car's headlights cut through the mist like two pale, unblinking eyes. The engine still hummed, vibrating faintly under the hood. Inside, nothing looked smashed or stolen. Emily's purse lay on the floorboard, contents intact, wallet, library ID, even the lipstick she'd been wearing earlier. Her phone sat on the passenger seat, screen flickering with new message notifications, and yet, the driver's seat was empty. Officer Mark Ellison was the first to arrive. A 13-year veteran of the Willow Creek Police Department, he knew the Harper family well. His first reaction was disbelief, not that a crime had occurred, but that Emily would ever leave her car running on the side of the road. It just wasn't her, he would later say. If she'd had a flat tire, she would have called someone. She wouldn't be out here alone in the rain. Ellison scanned the area with his flashlight, sweeping over the wet gravel and the dark tree line beyond. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, just the sound of rain pattering on metal and leaves. He radioed dispatch. Vehicle located, owner not on scene. This doesn't feel right. The rain, relentless since evening, was quickly erasing anything the ground might have recorded. If Emily had stepped into the woods, her trail would be gone within minutes. If someone had forced her out of the car, any tire tracks or scuffle marks would now be just churned mud and puddles. By 9:15 p.m., more officers arrived, along with 2 deputies from the county sheriff's office. They began a hasty search along both sides of the road, calling Emily's name into the darkness. Their voices carried, but the wind and rain swallowed them fast. This wasn't the open countryside where you could see for miles. It was dense woodland, broken on by narrow trails and steep drops toward the lake. If Emily was out there, injured or unconscious, the weather could be lethal. Detective Laura Camillini crouched by the driver's door. She noted how the seat was pushed forward, a sign Emily had been driving, since she was shorter than most people. Meanwhile, Sergeant David Rowe reached out to Emily's parents. They hadn't seen her since Sunday dinner, but they knew she'd been working late shifts at the library. The news hit them hard. Her mother's voice cracked over the phone as she said, "Emily wouldn't just walk away. Something's happened to her." The parents rushed to the scene, arriving just after 10 p.m. They stood under umbrellas, pale and silent, as officers worked around the car. Her father kept scanning the tree line as if she might step out any second. In most missing person cases involving foul play, there's something. A dropped shoe, a broken accessory, a trace of blood. Here, there was nothing. The car's interior was dry except for the driver's seat, where rain had soaked through. The purse and phone suggested she hadn't left willingly, yet there was no violence visible. Detective McKinney voiced what everyone was thinking. It's like she was just plucked out of thin air. Around 10:30 p.m., a call came in from a local resident, Alan Pierce, who'd been driving home from his brother's place around 8:20 p.m. He remembered seeing Emily's silver sedan on County Road 6, and right behind it, a dark green pickup truck. Pierce thought nothing of it at the time, but when he heard the news on the police scanner, he called in. He described the truck as an older Ford model, possibly mid-90s, with a dent in the rear bumper. The driver's face was obscured in the rain, but he thought it was a man. Officers logged the sighting and sent it to patrol units to watch for any green trucks in the area. While canvassing nearby homes, officers learned that Emily's ex-boyfriend, Derek Miles, drove a green Ford pickup that matched the description. Miles, 32, was a known figure in town. Quiet, polite, but with a temper that had surfaced in bar arguments. When asked about the relationship, neighbors and friends gave mixed answers. Some said Derek had been too intense with Emily. Others claimed he'd taken the breakup hard, trying repeatedly to call or text her in recent weeks. At 11:45 p.m., police knocked on Derek's door. He appeared calm, even mildly surprised at their questions. He said he'd been at home since early evening, watching TV, alone. When pressed, he added that he'd briefly gone out for gas around 8:30 p.m., but never saw Emily or her car. His clothes were dry. His truck, parked in the driveway, was wet from the rain, but clean inside. Officers didn't have enough to hold him, not without solid evidence tying him to Emily's disappearance. By 1 a.m., Willow Creek had mobilized a small army of volunteers. They walked shoulder to shoulder along the roadside, shining flashlights into ditches and culverts. A canine unit was brought in, but the rain made scent tracking nearly impossible. Every minute, the hope of finding Emily alive in the immediate area slipped further away. When the search was finally called off for the night at 3 a.m., there was a strange stillness at the scene. Officers covered Emily's car with a tarp to preserve what little evidence might remain. The glow from the headlights had dimmed to nothing. Detective McKinney stood by the vehicle, rain dripping from her hat, and said quietly to Roe, "We're not going to find her out here. Not tonight." What none of them knew was that the trail they were trying to follow would soon vanish for almost 2 decades, until technology caught up with the truth. By morning, the investigation would shift focus, and the name Derek Miles would move from the edges of suspicion to the very center of it. In the days after Emily Harper's disappearance, investigators realized they couldn't find her without first understanding her life, who she trusted, who she avoided, and who might have wanted to hurt her. Emily's friends described her as the kind of person who never left a conversation without a smile. She had grown up in Willow Creek, the daughter of a high school English teacher and a local carpenter. Books had always been her comfort, the kind you hold close at night, like friends who never leave. At 28, she worked at the town's modest public library. It wasn't glamorous, but she loved it. Every shelf felt like a map to someone else's world. She organized children's reading hours, kept the poetry section in meticulous order, and greeted every regular by name. Despite her quiet personality, Emily wasn't isolated. Her closest friends were part of a small community music group that met on Friday nights in a local cafe. They played guitar, sang folk songs, and sometimes stayed until closing, talking about everything from politics to camping trips. Those friends told police that Emily had been her usual cheerful self in the weeks before she vanished. With one exception. Whenever her ex-boyfriend's name came up, her expression shifted. Derek Miles, 32, wasn't a stranger to anyone in town. He'd grown up 2 counties over, but had been living in Willow Creek for 5 years. By trade, he was a mechanic, good with engines, quiet with people. He met Emily at the cafe where her music group played. At first, he seemed kind, attentive. Friends noticed he always walked her to her car, always paid the check. But over time, there were signs he wanted more control over her life. He'd ask who she was texting, drop by the library without calling, and get irritated if she made plans without him. Emily ended the relationship about 2 months before she disappeared. She told friends she needed breathing room and a little less intensity. Breakups in small towns are rarely clean. Derek didn't disappear from her world. He was still in the same grocery store aisles, still driving past the library, still visible at the edge of her social circle. Some friends recalled Emily mentioning late-night calls from him and texts that went unanswered. One friend, Jenna, even claimed that Derek had shown up at Emily's door one evening with flowers, insisting they talk things through. Emily had sent him away. When police began interviewing her friends, the stories varied. Some thought Derek was heartbroken but harmless. Others used words like persistent and overbearing. One friend told detectives that just a week before Emily vanished, she had seen Derek parked near the library at closing time. He was leaning against his truck, watching the doors. Another remembered Emily saying, "I think he's still following me sometimes, but maybe I'm imagining it." Investigators started piecing together Derek's behavior during the relationship. Small details emerged. He didn't like her going out with male friends. He often asked for her location, just to know she was safe. When they argued, he would go silent for days, then reappear as if nothing had happened. These weren't crimes on their own, but they painted a picture of a man who had trouble letting go. Detectives couldn't ignore that the only known vehicle seen near Emily's car the night she vanished was a green pickup, the same kind Derek drove. When asked, Derek admitted he had been out in his truck that evening, but denied seeing Emily. He claimed he had gone for gas, then straight home. Still, his history with her made him a person of interest, even if there was no proof yet. Emily's parents spoke openly about their daughter during interviews, sharing pictures of her hiking in the Cascades, playing guitar by the lake, and reading to kids at the library. Her mother, Linda, said Emily had been in a good place after the breakup. She had been planning a weekend trip with friends and looking into evening art classes. Nothing suggested she intended to leave town, or her life behind. For the next week, Willow Creek buzzed with search efforts and speculation. Some whispered that Derek had something to do with it. Others warned against rushing to judgment. Without evidence, police could only keep the conversation going, rechecking alibis, and waiting for a break. What they didn't know was that the truth, whatever it was, wouldn't surface for almost 2 decades. But in the shadows of Emily's seemingly ordinary life, there were fractures, small at first, but sharp enough to cut through everything when the night came.
The night Emily Harper vanished, every minute counted. Police began with the simplest question. What was the last confirmed sighting of Emily? The answer came quickly. A security camera at a small grocery store just 2 blocks from the library caught her walking out to her car at 8:15 p.m. She was alone. No sign of distress. She unlocked the driver's door, got in, and drove away. This footage matched what friends had already told police. Emily left work on time and planned to head home. But then came the detail that shifted the investigation. Another camera, mounted on a storage facility along the same road, picked up a vehicle following Emily's sedan less than a minute later, a green pickup truck. Around that same time, a man named Gary Willis was driving home from his shift at a lumber yard. He told detectives he'd noticed the green pickup too. What caught his attention was how closely it was following the smaller car in front. He remembered thinking, that truck's riding her bumper way too hard for an empty road. Willis described the truck in detail. Slightly faded paint, a dent in the rear bumper, and a long antenna mounted near the front. When police compared that to registered vehicles in the county, one name came up, Derek Miles. By the next day, detectives had Derek in the interview room. He didn't flinch when they mentioned the green pickup. Yes, he owned one. Yes, he'd been out driving that night. But when asked if he'd seen Emily, he shook his head. "No, I was out getting gas, then went home," he said. Derek even claimed he had an alibi, that after stopping for gas at around 8:30, he called a friend, stayed on the phone for over an hour, and then went to bed. The friend confirmed the call. The lack of physical evidence hurt the case. Emily's car, found 2 kilometers from her home, offered no signs of a struggle, no blood, no fingerprints that shouldn't have been there. Her purse sat untouched in the passenger seat, her phone on the driver's seat. The engine was still running when officers arrived. It was as if she had stepped out for just a moment and vanished into thin air.
Police canvassed the area, knocking on doors, asking about any unusual activity, but the rainstorm that night had washed away footprints, tire impressions, any trace of where Emily might have gone. Willow Creek was a small town, and people talked. Rumors swirled. Some were convinced Derek had something to do with it. Others believed Emily might have been targeted by a stranger passing through. Detectives kept Derek on their radar, but without hard evidence, they couldn't move forward. He wasn't under arrest, and he knew it. Within weeks, he left town, telling people he needed a fresh start. Months turned into years. Emily's face appeared on missing person flyers, in local news segments, on the wall of the post office. The Harper family held candlelight vigils every July, the anniversary of her disappearance. Detectives rotated in and out of the case file. Every so often, a new tip would come in, a supposed sighting, a claim from someone who knew someone who'd seen her, but each lead collapsed under scrutiny. For nearly 2 decades, the case collected dust in the cold case unit. In 2018, a shift began in forensic science. Advanced DNA sequencing and genealogical database matching were solving crimes once thought unsolvable. One day, in early 2022, a cold case detective named Laura Benton pulled Emily's file off the shelf. Benton was new to the unit, but had made it her mission to re-examine cases with potential biological evidence. Inside the evidence box, she found something most had overlooked: a simple black hair tie. It had been found in Emily's car, looped around the gear shift. At the time, nothing about it seemed suspicious. Emily wore her hair up often. But Benton knew that new technology could extract and profile DNA from even trace skin cells. The hair tie was sent to the state forensic lab. Weeks later, the results came back. They had a partial DNA profile, enough to search against the national database. And there it was. A match. Derek Miles. But this wasn't the Derek the town remembered. In 2022, he was living in a rural part of Montana under a different name, Daniel Myers. He had remarried, worked at an auto repair shop, and blended into his community as if the past didn't exist. When Montana deputies arrested him on a fugitive warrant, he looked more shocked than angry. Back in Oregon, Derek sat across from detectives once again, this time with a file of irrefutable science between them. When shown the DNA results, he leaned back, silent. For several minutes, he didn't speak at all. Finally, he muttered, "That doesn't mean I killed her." Detectives pressed harder. Why was his DNA on the hair tie in her car if he hadn't been with her that night? He offered no explanation, only that things got complicated after the breakup. News of Derek's arrest spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Some felt vindicated, certain they'd known all along. Others, even some of his old friends, said they couldn't believe it. For Emily's parents, it was a bittersweet moment. They had answers, but not closure. Emily's body had never been found. Prosecutors built their case around the DNA, the witness account of the green pickup, and Derek's inability to explain his movements that night. The defense argued there was no proof Emily was dead, no body, and that the hair tie could have been from months earlier, when they were still dating. But the jury didn't buy it. Combined with the history of controlling behavior, the stalking, and the matching vehicle sighting, the pattern was too clear. In 2023, Derek Miles was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Emily's case became a rallying point for cold case advocates. Local news outlets ran special features on the power of modern DNA testing. Detective Benton spoke publicly about the importance of preserving every piece of evidence, no matter how small, because science would one day catch up. For Willow Creek, it was a lesson in patience, persistence, and the reality that justice can be delayed, but not always denied. But even with Derek behind bars, one truth remained. Without Emily's body, her family would never truly have peace, and there were still unanswered questions about what happened in those final minutes of her life.
For nearly 2 decades, the case of Emily Harper lingered like an open wound in Willow Creek. Every July, her parents lit candles on their porch, facing the lake she loved. Every anniversary, the same questions returned. Who took her? Where is she now? Why hasn't anyone been held accountable? Detectives came and went, some retiring, some moving on. Files were transferred from one cold case shelf to another, their edges worn from being handled but never solved. By 2022, most of the original investigators had left to force. Only the family, a few dedicated locals, and a new generation of detectives kept the hope alive. Detective Laura Benton had transferred to the Willow Creek Police Department's cold case unit in early 2022. Benton had built a reputation for being relentless, the kind of investigator who believed that no case was truly unsolvable if the evidence still existed. When she opened Emily's case file for the first time, she was struck by how thorough the original investigation had been, yet how little it had yielded. Pages of interviews, maps of search areas, photographs of the car where it had been found, engine still running, and tucked into a small evidence envelope, almost overlooked, was the black hair tie found looped around the gear shift. In 2003, this hair tie had seemed irrelevant. Emily wore her hair up often. There was nothing to suggest it wasn't hers. But Benton knew DNA technology had advanced far beyond what was available 19 years earlier. She had seen other cases cracked open with touch DNA, tiny skin cells left behind on an object. If Emily had fought with someone, or if someone else had handled the hair tie, it might carry a microscopic clue. Benton ordered the item to be sent to the state forensic lab for reanalysis. Weeks passed. The lab worked carefully, extracting any trace of DNA from the worn elastic band. On a rainy Thursday morning, Benton got the call. The voice on the other end was calm, clinical, but the words hit like a thunderclap. "We have a full DNA profile from the hair tie. It's a match to a known offender in CODIS. The name is Derek Miles." Benton sat back, the file spread open in front of her. Derek Miles, the ex-boyfriend everyone had suspected in 2003, the man who had claimed to be elsewhere the night Emily vanished, the man who'd left Willow Creek just weeks after the disappearance. The DNA wasn't partial. It wasn't inconclusive. It was a complete profile, irrefutable in court. But there was more. A quick database search showed that Derek wasn't even living under his own name anymore. He had legally changed it years earlier, moving between states, eventually settling in a small town in Montana as Daniel Myers. Benton knew this couldn't be rushed. She contacted the Montana State Police and briefed them on the case. They began quiet surveillance of Derek's home, a modest, single-story house on the edge of town. He worked at a local auto repair shop, drove a different vehicle now, and was married. The contrast was jarring. In Willow Creek, Derek's name was tied to whispers and suspicion. In Montana, he was a neighbor, a husband, a man who fixed people's cars and made small talk at the grocery store. On a cold January morning, a convoy of unmarked police vehicles rolled quietly into Derek's neighborhood. At 6:45 a.m., 3 officers approached the front door, while others covered the back. When Derek answered in jeans and a t-shirt, still groggy from sleep, they wasted no time. "Derek Miles, you're under arrest for the murder of Emily Harper," an officer announced. His wife, standing just behind him, froze. "Who?" she asked, confusion flooding her voice. Derek didn't resist. He simply stared at the floor as they cuffed him and led him out into the freezing air. Derek was extradited to Oregon within days. The news exploded across Willow Creek. After 19 years, the man many had suspected was finally in custody. For Emily's parents, it was a moment they'd imagined 1,000 times but had begun to doubt would ever come. Her mother said quietly to reporters, "Now we just want to know why." Back in the same police department where he'd been questioned in 2003, Derek sat across from Detective Benton.
The walls were bare except for a clock that seemed louder with every tick. She laid out the evidence: the DNA on the hair tie, the witness statement about the green pickup, his sudden departure from Willow Creek. For a long time, Derek said nothing. He shifted in his chair, rubbed his hands together. According to Derek, he had seen Emily driving home that night and decided to follow her. He claimed he just wanted to talk. They pulled over, exchanged heated words, and she tried to walk away. He grabbed her arm. She fought back. In what he called a moment of losing control, he attacked her. When asked where Emily's body was, Derek refused to answer. He looked Benton in the eye and said, "That's mine to keep." The prosecution's case was straightforward. The DNA was definitive. The history of harassment after their breakup showed motive, and the witness testimony about the green pickup linked him directly to the scene. The defense argued that without a body, there could be no proof of murder, but the jury wasn't swayed. The combination of scientific evidence, circumstantial links, and Derek's own partial admission sealed his fate. After 2 weeks of testimony, the verdict was unanimous: guilty of first-degree murder. Derek Miles was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In court, Emily's parents read statements describing 19 years of uncertainty, fear, and grief. Her father's voice cracked as he said, "You took our daughter, and you took 19 years of our lives waiting for this day." Detective Benton became a local hero, her work praised as an example of why cold cases should never be abandoned. Despite the conviction, one thing remained unresolved. Emily's body had never been found. For her family, closure was only partial. They knew who had taken her, but they still didn't know where she was. Benton promised them that search efforts would continue, that finding Emily was now the department's top priority. The case of Emily became a statewide example of the power of modern forensic science. Other cold cases in Oregon began getting similar re-examinations, leading to new arrests. For Willow Creek, the arrest of Derek Miles was the end of a long chapter, but also a reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight, and how justice, though slow, can still arrive. Derek was behind bars, but Emily was still out there somewhere. For her family, the fight wasn't over, and the search for her final resting place was only beginning. When the gavel came down in the Willow Creek courthouse, a silence fell over the room. The kind of silence that comes when a long, unresolved story finally has an ending. Derek Miles, once a familiar face in this small town, was now a convicted murderer sentenced to life in prison without parole. Outside the courthouse, a crowd gathered. Some had followed the case from day one. Others had grown up hearing whispers about Emily Harper's disappearance. A few shook their heads in disbelief. They had defended Derek for years, insisting the police had been wrong. Now, confronted with undeniable DNA evidence, those beliefs collapsed. For nearly 20 years, Willow Creek had been split into two camps. There were those who believed Derek had harmed Emily, and those convinced he'd been unfairly targeted. In the early years after Emily vanished, Derek's supporters organized fundraisers for his legal expenses. They printed T-shirts reading "Justice for Derek" and insisted the police were wasting time focusing on him. The trial shattered that divide. Supporters who had defended him publicly now faced the reality that they had been protecting a killer. Some spoke to reporters, their voices breaking, admitting they felt betrayed. Others refused to talk at all, retreating into silence. For Emily's parents, the guilty verdict didn't bring celebration, just a kind of quiet relief. Her mother said, "It's not happiness, it's knowing we were right, and that he can't hurt everyone else." Her father stayed behind after the courtroom emptied, standing in the same spot where he'd testified. When asked why, he said softly, "This is where I finally got to tell him what he did to our family." But even as relief settled in, grief still lived in the gaps, especially the unanswered question of where Emily's body was. Without that, the pain couldn't fully close. The day after sentencing, Detective Laura Benton met with the Harper family. She explained that while the criminal case was closed, the search for Emily would remain active. Search teams began combing through wooded areas outside town, guided by maps of where Derek had been seen in the days after Emily's disappearance. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Old tips from 2003 were reevaluated, and new appeals for information went out on television and social media. Local volunteers, some of whom had been teenagers when Emily...
In prison, Derek Miles kept to himself. He did not appeal his conviction. He did not write letters to protest his innocence. Some speculated he might eventually reveal where Emily's remains were hidden. Others doubted it, believing that withholding that information was his last act of control over her and her family. In interviews, retired investigators called Derek a textbook case of someone who hides in plain sight. He had lived in another state under a new name, blending into small-town life while carrying the weight of his crime. The case had hovered over Willow Creek like a storm cloud for 19 years. Every time the anniversary of Emily's disappearance came around, the town felt the weight. Businesses closed early. The local paper reprinted the missing person poster. Now, with Derek behind bars, there was a noticeable shift. People spoke of Emily more openly. The library where she had worked dedicated a small memorial corner in her name, filled with her favorite books and a framed photograph of her, smiling at a summer picnic. At the dedication, her best friend, Claire, told the crowd, "Emily loved this town. I hope we can remember her for how she lived, not just how she was taken from us." Emily Harper's case began to appear in law enforcement training sessions across Oregon. Detectives were taught how advances in forensic science could breathe new life into old files. The state's cold case unit received increased funding, with the DNA match in Emily's case used as the centerpiece of their public campaign. It's never too late for justice. Within a year, 2 other long unsolved cases in Oregon saw breakthroughs because evidence was retested with modern DNA techniques. In each instance, detectives credited the renewed attention sparked by Emily's case. The arrest and conviction made national headlines. True crime podcasts and documentaries reached out to the Harper family, though most requests were declined. The family had lived with public speculation for too long and wanted to grieve in private. Still, Emily's story became a cautionary tale in news segments and crime discussion forums. That killers can live quietly among us, that justice can be delayed but still arrive, and that scientific progress can turn the tide in cases once thought impossible to solve. 2 summers after the verdict, Emily's parents planted a tree in her memory at the edge of Willow Lake. It was a maple, chosen because it would turn a deep red each autumn, her favorite season. They invited the search volunteers, the detectives, and the prosecutors who had worked on the case. Detective Benton spoke briefly, promising to keep looking for Emily's final resting place. Her mother placed a small plaque at the base of the tree. It read, "For Emily, forever loved, forever missed. We will bring you home." Emily Harper's murder taught Willow Creek many things, about trust, about persistence, and about the quiet danger of assuming someone is incapable of violence simply because you think you know them. It also reinforced something her parents had said for years, that keeping a case alive, no matter how cold it seems, can make all the difference when the technology catches up. In court, the prosecutor had summed it up simply. This case was solved because we didn't stop looking. Today, Derek Miles is inmate number 48219 in an Oregon State Penitentiary. Emily Harper rests only in memory. Her physical remains still unrecovered. Willow Creek continues to search, not out of obligation, but because for this town, Emily was one of their own. And the story isn't truly over until she's brought home. Every October, as the leaves turn red around Willow Lake, the community gathers at the maple tree. They share stories, light candles, and stand in quiet reflection. The crime took Emily's life, but the fight for justice and the unity it brought to her community remains her lasting legacy. Justice came almost 20 years late, but it came. And in that small town by the lake, no one will ever forget the girl who vanished, or the man who thought he'd gotten away with murder.